The desert night doesn't whisper, it growls. Deadwater Gulch lay still beneath the swollen moon, its cracked wooden boards sighing in the hot wind. The sheriff's horse clopped cautiously through the dust-choked street, hooves echoing between hollow storefronts. Once, this place had been a waypoint for weary travelers, miners chasing silver, cowhands pushing cattle north. Now, it was just bones. The saloon's doors swung with a ghost's rhythm, creaking against the night. A lantern still burned inside, swaying. On its hook, the sheriff dismounted, boots crunching over the dry earth, hand hovering close to the iron at his hip. He wasn't the kind of man to spook easy, but even he felt the weight pressing down from that moon above. Bloated, red-tinged, watching, he stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Not whiskey, not smoke, blood. It clung to the air, sweet and sharp. Chairs lay scattered, poker chips across the floor like coins spilled in a rush. Behind the counter, the wood was raked deep with claw marks, not the kind a knife could make, not the kind any man could. He turned, slow as molasses, and saw the trail, drops of crimson, leading through the bat-wing doors out back into the alley. But there was no body, no boots dragged, just vanishing, like the earth itself swallowed whoever bled. A howl rose from the ridge beyond the town. Long, low, hungry, it cut straight through his bones. The sheriff froze, every instinct screaming at him to ride hard, leave Deadwater Gulch behind. But something heavier than fear kept his boots nailed to the floor. Maybe duty, maybe guilt, maybe just plain stupidity. The wind pushed harder now, carrying whispers of voices that weren't there. He swore he heard laughter, cracked and guttural, riding on that howl. The lantern flickered. The piano in the corner trembled like something had brushed its keys. He backed out into the street, scanning rooftops, alleys, shadows. His hand gripped the revolver. Not iron rounds tonight. Silver. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Another howl answered the first, this one closer, echoing off canyon walls. Then another, and another, a chorus gathering in the dark. Deadwater Gulch wasn't a ghost town. It was a hunting ground. The sheriff pulled his hat low, eyes narrowing against the moonlight. He knew what was coming, and he knew one truth about the frontier. Outlaws had faces, names, and posters tacked on saloon walls. But the beasts wore the faces of men you once trusted. A shape darted between buildings too fast for his eyes, just a shadow, but it lingered in the corner of his vision, crouched and waiting. His horse screamed in terror, kicking against the hitching post until the rope snapped. It bolted into the night, leaving the sheriff alone. Alone except for the sound of claws scratching wood. The sheriff raised his gun. "Come on then," he muttered, throat dry, "I ain't running." The howl that answered wasn't far off now. It was right above him. He tipped his head back, and there, crouched on the saloon roof, was the silhouette of a man twisted wrong, elongated arms, a jaw too long, teeth catching the moonlight, its eyes burned like coals locked on him. The beast crouched lower, ready to leap, and the sheriff whispered a prayer, not for his life, but for the bullet in the chamber to fly true. If you felt the chill of that first howl, stay with us. Subscribe before the night takes you. Morning never truly breaks in the desert, it just bleeds into the sky. The sheriff sat on the saloon porch, revolver across his lap, staring at the boot tracks that ended halfway down the street. He hadn't slept, not with the howls ringing. In his ears by dawn, the town was still empty, silent as a coffin. That's when the stranger came riding in, the drifter. A broad-shouldered man with a duster coat torn along the back, hat pulled low, and eyes that carried a darkness deeper than the desert itself. His horse was half dead, foam on its lips, flanks scarred. He dismounted slow, as if each step fought against pain. When he leaned on the hitching post, the sheriff saw his hands, scarred, twisted, nails too sharp. "Town's deserted," the sheriff said, voice tight. The drifter gave him a look, one of those glances that measured a man, not just his words, not deserted, hunted. The sheriff stiffened. "You know something?" The drifter spat into the dust. "Only what the land tells me, and it's been cursed a long time." Inside the saloon, a few souls had gathered, miners too stubborn to flee, a barkeep who'd seen better years, and a woman with a child clutched tight. They all eyed the drifter as he walked in, spurs clinking. The barkeep's voice cracked when he spoke. "Is it true then, the old tales? The Pact of Silver Creek? The drifter didn't answer right away. He pulled a chair, sat down slow, and poured himself a drink with hands that trembled too much for a steady man. Then he began. They say long before Deadwater Gulch, before settlers brought iron and whiskey, the tribes here made a pact. The land wasn't theirs to keep. It belonged to the wolves, not the kind that hunt deer, the kind that wear a man's skin when the sun shines. To cross the desert, to drink from the creek, you had to give blood, and when the moon rose, you stayed inside. The room went cold. Even the child seemed to understand. But then the miners came. The drifter continued, digging silver from the mountains. And silver's the one thing that cuts him deep, broke the pact, spilled more than rock from the earth, spilled the curse loose. The sheriff leaned forward. And you? You running from them or riding with them? The drifter's eyes flashed just for a heartbeat with something inhuman. He looked down quick, tugging his glove tight over the scarred hand. Both, he muttered. Barkeep swore under his breath. The miners shifted in their seats. The woman pulled her child closer. Out here, fear didn't need proof, it only needed a whisper. That night, they tried to bar the windows. Nail boards across the doors, keep lanterns burning bright. But everyone in Deadwater Gulch knew it was just pretending. Wolves didn't fear wood or fire. And if the drifter spoke truth, the pact was already broken. The sheriff kept watch with his rifle. The drifter sat in shadow, sipping whiskey like it was his last. Outside, the desert stirred. Horses snorted in terror. Coyotes went silent. Then, faint at first, came the sound of claws scratching across the rooftops. The curse wasn't just a story, it was here. Some of you know this legend already. Comment if you've heard whispers of this curse before. The herd was restless. Cattle bawled and pressed against each other as the hands cracked their whips, driving them across the flatlands under the rising moon. Dust hung thick in the air, glowing silver as night swallowed the horizon. The sheriff had joined the drovers, hoping sheer numbers might hold the beasts at bay. But even he felt it, the way the herd's eyes rolled too wide, the way they flinched at shadows that weren't there. The drifter rode at the rear, head low, coat collar pulled high. He didn't speak. He just kept his gaze on the hills, watching, waiting. A howl shattered the night. The cattle panicked, stampeding in every direction. The ground shook under 1,000 hooves, men shouting, ropes snapping. Then, on the ridge they appeared, dark figures against the moon, too tall, too thin, moving with a grace no man should. Their eyes caught the moonlight like lanterns. Wolves, someone screamed. But these weren't wolves, not the kind that ran on 4 legs. The first one leapt, landing in the center of the herd with a crunch of bones and a scream from the nearest ranch hand. Its jaws unhinged, tearing through hide and flesh. The herd split around it, blood sprang into the dust. More followed, 5, 6, maybe more, ripping into cattle, into men, dragging them down beneath claws as long as knives. The sheriff fired, silver rounds flashing. One of the beasts dropped with a howl, but it wasn't dead. It rose again, bullets glowing faint where they sank into its chest. The drifter shouted over the chaos, "Headshots! Only headshots slow 'em." Then before anyone could ask how he knew, the drifter fell from his horse with a cry, clutching his arm. His body convulsed, spine arching, muscles twisting like ropes pulled too tight. The men around him froze. They'd seen fear, madness, even plague before, but never this. His skin rippled, bones popping loud enough to make stomachs turn. His jaw cracked, splitting forward, teeth lengthening as foam and blood poured from his mouth. His hands clawed into the dirt, nails blackening, curling into talons. "God help us," whispered the sheriff. The drifter screamed, half human, half wolf. His hat tumbled into the dust, revealing, eyes blazing with gold fire. He turned on the nearest hand, snapping jaws wide, then stopped just for a heartbeat, fighting it. His body shuddered, torn between the man he was and the beast clawing free. "Run," he gasped, voice thick with growl. "Run, before I—" The sentence ended in a howl that shook the earth. The cattle scattered in every direction, trampling men beneath their hooves. Wolves darted in and out of the chaos, dragging prey down, tearing flesh. The sheriff fired again and again, silver biting into the pack, but the herd made clean shots near impossible. One beast lunged, claws swiping the sheriff's chest, shredding his coat. He fell back, blood dripping, but his revolver stayed steady. He put a round through its skull, and the monster collapsed. Twitching in the dirt, the drifter, half-turned now, his face stretched, teeth snapping, charged at another wolf, tackling it away from the drovers. They rolled in the dust, snarling, tearing, a blur of claws and fangs. The men couldn't tell if he fought with them or against them. By the time the moon climbed high, the herd was gone, scattered across the plains. Half the drovers lay dead. The survivors clutched rifles with shaking hands, staring at the shadows, moving beyond the fires they'd lit in desperation. The drifter knelt at the edge of the light, chest heaving, body broken from resisting the change. His face was human again, but his eyes still glowed faintly. The sheriff approached, revolver leveled. "Tell me why I shouldn't put you down." The drifter raised his scarred hands. "Because I ain't with them. Not yet. And you'll need me when the alpha comes." The sheriff's grip tightened on the trigger. He wasn't sure which was worse, the wolves out there in the dark, or the half-wolf already inside their camp. If the snap of bone made you wince, hit like, and let the algorithm know you survived. The survivors staggered back to Deadwater Gulch under a sky bruised with moonlight. No herd, half their men gone, blood on their boots and in their throats. They didn't speak. The scream still echoed too loud in their heads. The sheriff led the way, one arm bound with a strip of cloth, blood soaking through. The drifter stumbled beside him, pale, trembling, fighting back shudders that rippled through his body like aftershocks of an earthquake. Every step looked like it might be his last, or the moment the beast inside tore free again. They reached the saloon and shoved inside, barring the doors with whatever lumber they could drag. Lanterns flared, their weak light painting shadows across terrified faces. The barkeep's hands shook too bad to pour whiskey. The woman who'd come earlier with her child now clutched a shotgun almost bigger than she was. The sheriff slammed his fist against the counter. "Listen close, they're not coyotes, they're not outlaws, they're something else. They'll come tonight, and if we don't stand, none of us see sunrise." From the silence, one of the miners croaked, "Then what do we do? Run?" The drifter coughed a laugh, bitter and hollow. "You don't run, they'll chase, you hole up, you fight, and you pray the silver holds." Outside, the desert had gone quiet. Too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears makes you wish for the sound of crickets or wind, anything but the nothing that told you predators were near. The first sound was claws, scratching on wood, slow, testing, a nail dragging along the length of the saloon wall, then tapping against the windows. The child whimpered. The mother pulled him close, hand over his mouth. Then the eyes came. Dozens of them, burning gold peering through every crack, every broken pane glowing in the dark. Shadows shifted outside, circling. The sound of low growls rumbled like thunder beneath the floorboards. The sheriff raised his rifle. The drifter pushed himself up, knuckles white as he loaded silver into his revolver. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the beast still inside him, clawing for release. The scratching grew louder, turning to pounding. The boards rattled, the lanterns flickered. Then, from the roof, came a heavy thud. Something big had landed above them. Dust fell from the rafters. The piano groaned as the saloon's frame shuddered under the weight, eyes on every wall. The sheriff barked, "They're testing us!" The barkeep aimed his shotgun toward the door, sweat dripping into his eyes. The miners whispered prayers. The woman's finger tightened on the trigger, barrel aimed at the nearest window. Then the howls. Did not one, not two, a dozen. A chorus that shook Deadwater Gulch down to its bones. The saloon walls rattled, windows shattering as claws raked through. One wolf's arm shot inside, swiping at the barkeep, caught him across the chest, sent him sprawling with blood spilling down his shirt. The others opened fire, silver flashing, smoke choking the air. Bullets punched through the dark outside, some hitting, some wasted. But for every beast they drove back, two more pressed close. The eyes never stopped glowing. The scratching never stopped spreading. It was a siege, and the wolves had all the time in the world. The drifter leaned close to the sheriff, voice low, guttural. "When the alpha comes, this won't matter. He'll break through like paper." The sheriff swallowed hard. "Then we hold till dawn, or we die here, outside." A shape moved, bigger than the rest, taller, stronger. Its eyes burned hotter. The alpha had arrived. "Where would you run if glowing eyes stared through your window? Tell me below. I want to see who would survive." By the time the moon had hiked higher, The saloon looked like a chapel built out of fear. Lanterns burning like votives, rifles laid on the bar like offerings, eyes closed in prayers that had never worked out here. The scratching faded to a distant circle, the way wolves pace a herd they know is going nowhere. It wasn't mercy, it was the patience of butchers. The drifter stood and moved to the back room, boots slow, shoulders bowed. The sheriff followed, revolver low because trust is a thin blanket on a cold night. They pushed through a door into a storage space that had once been a card room. Now it was dust, crates, and a cracked map of the territory nailed to the wall. The drifter pointed to a black seam etched in ink, Silver Creek. Before this town had a name, he said, the people here called that stream Wolf Water. They didn't drink it on full moons. They didn't hunt near it. They laid meat on flat stones and backed away with their heads bowed. It wasn't worship. It was respect. He set a lantern on the table and rolled up his sleeve. The sheriff flinched. The drifter's forearm was a sketched storm of scars and puckered flesh. Lodged beneath the skin, glinting when the lantern swayed, were flecks of dull metal silver, the sheriff muttered. In me, the drifter said. Not on me. A blacksmith hammered filings into cuts, then burned them shut with a horseshoe, said it'd hobble the wolf, slow the tide when the moon pulled. He was right, mostly, the sheriff swallowed. Why would you let a man brand your bones? The drifter stared at the map without seeing it. Because I broke the pact, he told it plain, like all confessions worth hearing. Years back, a posse chased an outlaw to the creek. The outlaw crossed the water at dusk, laughing, sure the night would hide him. The posse shot a wolf that rose from the reeds, too quick, too tall, eyes like stove coal. It was no wolf, it was a sentinel, and the creek ran bright with its blood. By dawn, the outlaw was gone, and the men who fired the shot started waking up with their jaws aching, their breath hot and wrong. A woman from the hills came down and said words none of them understood, then told the drifter he had one thread of mercy left. Sow silver into your wounds, or you'll be sowing others into the ground. So the curse isn't the wolves, the sheriff said, voice small in the lantern light. It's the breaking of the way the land remembers, the drifter said. We don't. The sheriff leaned over the table. In the margin of the map, someone had sketched a circle of triangles around a crescent shape, crudely like a miner copying a mark he'd seen on a cave wall. What's that? The drifter brushed the paper with 2 fingers, careful. A binding sign, old as bone dust. They carved it over the mine entrance when they hit the rich vein. Silver shot through with something darker. The foreman called it ore, the hill called it marrow. From the front room came a crack of wood, a stifled scream, the barkeep cursing as he tied a shirt across his chest. The wolves tested the boards again, patient as rain. The drifter looked back to the sheriff, eyes hard. You can shoot the pack and they'll scatter, but the alpha will pull them back together. By dawn, you want it to end, you brand the alpha with that sign, in silver, and you put him in the ground. Brand? The sheriff blinked. Not kill. Killing's a door. Some things come back through it. Branding's a lock. They moved fast then, the way condemned men do when their hands finally find purpose. The sheriff sent the miners to the smithy across the street with every bar, coin, and spoon of silver they could strip from belt buckles and brooches. The woman with the shotgun kept watch on the roof hatch with a lantern and a prayer no one taught her. The drifter scratched the binding sign into a scrap of pine, then into a coin, then into the back of his own hand until blood beaded. Practice makes permanent. The smithy could have been a church for the way it glowed. The forge spat and hummed, bellows wheezing, shadows staggering across walls lined with tools that looked suddenly like ritual instruments. The miners melted a slush of silver that smoked, sweet and toxic, and the drifter wristed the coin into a crucible until it slumped like a wet moon. The sheriff found an old cartridge die and a brass case, hands steady despite the shaking floor. Together they poured, tapped, pressed. The drifter scribed the binding mark into the softened slug before it set, whispering a word he'd learned the hard way to pronounce. By the time they crimped the round, the saloon across the street rattled like a drum. Something massive walked its roof. Feet that hit with purpose. The sheriff held the cartridge up to the forge light. The symbol, 3 triangles in a ring, around a crescent, caught fire in the reflection. 1 bullet, the sheriff said. 1 chance, the drifter answered. You load it, I'll draw him. Why you? Because I smell like his sin, the drifter said. And the truth hung there, heavy as a church bell. They stepped into the street with the cartridge warm in the sheriff's palm. The town was a throat holding a scream. The moon was a brand waiting. For flesh, the Alpha's shadow turned on the saloon roof, and the drifter lifted his face to it like a man greeting the gallows he deserved. Curses like this don't end. They echo, subscribe, and join the archive before the next howl. Midnight came like a hammer. The moon sat swollen over Deadwater Gulch, fat and red, pouring its light down the empty street. Every shuttered window, every boarded door shivered with the weight of claws outside. The survivors waited in the saloon, guns trembling, lanterns burning down to nubs. Then the roof groaned. The Alpha was here. The drifter stood in the doorway, shoulders squared, as if daring the beast to step into the light. His eyes glowed faint, the wolf inside clawing for release. The sheriff knelt at the bar, revolver steady, the single silver cartridge cradled like communion bread. One bullet, one chance. The roof caved. The Alpha dropped through in a storm of splinters and dust, taller than any man, broader than any ox, fur black as tar and steaming with heat. Its jaws gaped wide, strings of spit stretching between fangs longer than knives. Its eyes, too, lanterns of goldfire, found the drifter, and recognition flickered. This wasn't just prey, this was family. The drifter charged, firing both pistols, silver rounds snapping into fur. The Alpha barely flinched, swatting him aside with a claw that split his coat and flesh in one stroke. He hit the piano hard, keys shrieking in a broken chord that hung in the air like a scream. The survivors opened fire. Rifles barked. Shotguns boomed, silver rounds sparking against hide. The Alpha moved through it like rain, every bullet buying seconds, not salvation. It tore through the bar, flung tables aside, sent a miner's body crashing against the wall. The barkeep went down with his throat open. The woman pulled her child behind the counter, firing wild into the dark. The sheriff rose, a marked bullet heavy in the chamber. He steadied his breath, but the Alpha was too fast, moving from shadow to shadow, tearing wood apart, knocking men down like straw. The sheriff couldn't line the shot. Not yet. The drifter staggered up. From the wreck of the piano, half his face furred, jaw split with fangs, his voice came out broken, snarled. "Sheriff, on me!" He rushed the Alpha, slamming into it with a strength no man should carry. They grappled, claws and fists, teeth sinking into flesh. The Alpha roared, biting into his shoulder, lifting him like a rag doll. The drifter screamed, but held on, digging, his clawed hand into the beast's throat, forcing its head back. The sheriff saw it, the binding sign seared into the silver slug, glowing faint in the chamber. He raised the revolver, lining the sights on the Alpha's chest. No shot. The drifter's body blocked it. Then the drifter did the only thing left. He tore his own shirt open, baring the scars, the silver buried beneath his skin. He locked eyes with the sheriff, blood running down his teeth. Now, the Alpha sank its jaws into him. The drifter dragged its head low, baring its chest wide. The sheriff fired. The bullet flew true, searing light as it struck the Alpha. The binding mark blazed white-hot, burning through fur and flesh, carving the ancient sign into its heart. The beast howled, a sound so loud it shattered lantern glass, rattled bones, and sent every wolf outside into a frenzy of shrieks. The Alpha convulsed, flames licking from the wound, light pouring from its eyes, its mouth. It dropped the drifter and staggered, clawing at its own chest, the sign glowing brighter and brighter. The saloon shook as if the earth itself wanted no part of the curse. Then, with a roar that split heaven and hell, the Alpha collapsed into the flames, body burning down to ash that smelled of blood, and iron silence followed. Only the crackle of fire and the shallow breath of the survivors. The sheriff lowered his revolver, arm numb. He looked at the drifter sprawled in the wreckage of the piano. Still, too still, his face was half wolf, frozen in that in-between. But in his hand, he still clutched a fragment of silver coin. The mark etched deep, the pack outside fled into the desert, howls fading into nothing. For the first time all night, Deadwater Gulch was quiet. But quiet in the West never lasts. This isn't the last transformation. The next one is worse. Follow. The howl to the story waiting on screen. Dawn arrived like a guilty man, late, pale, unwilling to meet anyone's eye. Deadwater Gulch smoked inside, a ribcage of a town cooling under the new sun. The saloon's roof was a toothless grin, its piano a carcass of ivory and ash. Men spoke in whispers because the quiet felt earned, and the dead were still counting. The sheriff sat on the boardwalk with his back against a splintered post, hat in his hands, gun empty in his lap. He watched the ashes where the Alpha had burned, and thought about doors and locks and how people always confuse the two. The drifter lay wrapped in a canvas sheet near the trough. Someone had folded his arms as if prayer could be remembered on a body that never knew any. A boy, barely 16, eyes the color of creek water, hovered with a tin cup, coffee. Sheriff? The sheriff took it. The heat bit his fingers. He didn't drink. The woman and her child stood by the church that wasn't really a church, just boards hammered into a promise. She asked the question nobody wanted to uncork. Is it over? He should have lied. That's what lawmen are for when the truth is a mouthful of broken glass. He set the cup down and shook his head once. Not here, no, but it moves. Curses are cowboys at heart. They wander. He rose slow. The movement pulled. His shirt and the fabric stuck where blood had dried. The slash across his ribs burned like a brand. He had cleaned it with whiskey. It laughed at the gesture. On his palm he turned the last fragment of the drifter's silver coin. The binding mark glinted, almost friendly in daylight. A wind pushed through town, carrying a skitter of paper and a ghost of last night's howls. Out by the livery the miners hitched a wagon, heads down, refusing to look at the sheet where the drifter slept. The barkeep's chair rocked empty beside the door. The child ran his finger over the claw marks carved deep into the threshold. As if reading a language he'd have to learn too young. The sheriff walked to the canvas. He crouched, set the coin under the drifter's hand, and nodded once. You dragged it to the fire, he said. That counts. He felt the stare before he saw it. On the saloon's shadowed wall, where the sun hadn't yet peeled night away, a pair of gold eyes blinked once and disappeared. Not a threat, an echo, a promise that the world keeps its habits. The woman stepped closer. Where will you go? Where the road forgets its name, he eased his glove on. It caught on ruined skin at his wrist. The bite there, small, almost delicate compared to the Alpha's ruin, had scabbed over in a ring that looked like a moon trying to be whole. He tugged the glove down and cinched it tight. Some truths deserve a hatband. Others deserve a shroud. He saddled a horse that hadn't run, old, stubborn, the kind that knows which way water smells. As he swung up, the boy blurted, "If they come back?" The sheriff touched the brim of his hat. "Light your lanterns, draw your circles. Keep your silver honest and don't break what was here before you came." He started down the street, hooves clopping a funeral tempo. At the edge of town, he paused and looked back. Deadwater Gulch stood in the morning like a lesson written in smoke. He thought of the drifter's arm glittering with filings, of the creek that used to be called Wolfwater, of a sign older than maps cut into a single bullet that found its mark. Because both the man and the monster wanted it there. The desert opened its jaw. Heat shimmered, far out, a circling column of dust marked cattle that hadn't learned last night's law. The sheriff felt the pull under his glove, the ache, the throb, the slow tide. Tonight wouldn't be kind, tomorrow either. He'd have to find a blacksmith who didn't ask questions and a creek that remembered him mercifully. On a ridge, a lone figure watched him ride, something too tall to be a coyote, too still to be a man who feared anything. The sheriff didn't turn his head. You don't wave at weather. You ride through it until the next town asks you your name and you lie. Politely he let the road take him. The sun climbed, the bite burned somewhere behind him. A piano key finally fell off its stem and clicked against the floor like a closing locket. Every frontier needs a sheriff. Every curse prefers a courier. The horse crested a rise, and the sheriff spoke, voice low, almost tender. "If you're in, there keep your teeth to yourself till sundown, we got work." The wind answered with a dry laugh and the faintest rumor of a howl that might have been memory. He rode on. The pack grows stronger with every whisper. Share this tale if you dare, and join us before the curse finds you alone. If the archive calls to you, subscribe. Our records of silver and blood run deep, and for those who hunger for more, step deeper into the shadows with our ultimate werewolf horror playlist, linked in the description below. In the world of horror, the scariest things happen when you least expect them, and trust me, you don't want to be left in the dark. Welcome to the darkness.